I've slept under a light snowfall at minus 25 degrees in Finland. I've been more drunk than a teenager on New Year's Eve, emptying a huge bottle of black homemade vodka with a Kazakh badass woman. I climbed the highest peaks in Iran with a constant grin on my face. I've been accepted into Aboriginal communities in the Australian Outback. I've screamed from the top of my lungs, rolling down a 5,000 meters pass on a Tibetan plateau. I've been rescued by guys on mushrooms from a 4,500 meter mountain in Tajikistan. I've fallen in and out of love. I've been in house arrest by the police in Uzbekistan. I laughed myself into tears, dancing in a borrowed pajamas with a Turkish family. I cried myself to sleep in the Russian woods, and I pinched myself in the arm when reaching another totally jaw-dropping valley on the Mongolian steppe, just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. That is this journey. Those people are what counts. And those are the moments that will make me laugh, cry, and everything in between for the rest of my life.
That's Anne Johansson talking about her cycling adventure from Sweden to New Zealand, and she is today's guest on episode 202 of the Pursuit Zone podcast. Welcome back. I'm Paul Schmid, and I interview explorers that dream big, break out of their comfort zones, and take on ambitious pursuits. Let's start the show, and let me introduce my guest. She left her job as a graphic designer and traveled to New Zealand to start her first bicycle tour. But when it was over, she knew she wanted more. A few years later, in 2015, she cycled away from her home in Sweden with the plan to ride back to New Zealand. The journey took her through Europe, Turkey, and Iran, before ending with an injured foot on the Pamir Highway in Tajikistan. Back in Sweden, after 4 months of recovery, she began again on a new route that would take her across Russia, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, China, and Australia. Near the end of 2017, after 36,000 kilometers, she cycled into Wellington, New Zealand, marking the end of her amazing adventure. You can learn more at her website, myrawa.com. Anne Johansson, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
First of all, Anne, what is Myrawa?
It's actually a made-up name for my whole trip. From the beginning, I was just looking for a free domain, a name that haven't been used before on social media and for a website. So I started to play around. I was inspired by the language in New Zealand, Maori, and I liked the way it sounded. And I started to play with the letters, and then I just came up with this word that sounded right.
Where are you from in Sweden?
Originally, I'm from a very small village called Sunnes. It's central Sweden by the coast, just 10 households or something. And then after my parents' divorce, I also lived in a small town called Ljusne. So when I was 16, I moved to Stockholm and I started running high school. I've been running since I was 5 years old. I tried everything, cross-country running, orienteering, and then I ended up in track and field. So I was competing in track and field from the age of 12 and up. So I started running high school, and running was my whole life, basically. I also went to US on a scholarship. I competed for Northern Arizona University in Arizona, in Flagstaff, when I was 20. And running was such a huge part of my life that I didn't do much else than training and competing up until I was like 22, 23, when I decided to start studying. So I studied at the university in Sweden, and I got a degree in graphic design.
Once you got your degree, you went to work as a graphic designer?
Yes, I started off doing some internships. So when I graduated, I had big goals. I wanted to work for a good design agency in Stockholm, but I knew I needed to work my way up. And that started with internships and basically working for free. So I worked really hard for it. And after 2 years, I got a job at one of the biggest advertising agencies in Stockholm as an art director. And I thought this was what I wanted. And it was on my way to my goals within my career. But after a while, I realized it wasn't really what I was looking for. I spent long days in front of the computer. I went on the subway to do work. I sat in front of the computer. I took the subway home. I did some training and I went to bed. And that was my life. So I felt like I was really stuck in this routine, being quite young and living in the city. And I felt like I wanted something more out of life than that. I was 25 and I felt like I don't want to be stuck with this now for the rest of my life. And that's kind of where this idea started, to go travel the world. And I decided to quit my job as a graphic designer. I canceled my apartment and I booked a ticket to New Zealand.
So why cycle touring? How did you learn about it?
On New Zealand, actually. So when I flew there, it was 2012. I was gonna go backpacking like most people do on New Zealand. I was sitting on the buses between hostels and I just felt like I was missing out on something. I saw this landscape passing by, sitting in the bus, all these beautiful places I never got to see. And instead I went to next hostels, staying with people that mostly were there for partying. Then I decided I'm going to try this thing, bike touring. I heard about it before. I knew nothing about it. I rented a bicycle. I got the panniers and everything with it. I tucked my backpack down one of the panniers and I started to cycle. And my goal was to cycle the South Island of New Zealand. I started off from Blenheim in the north of the South Island. And I didn't even know how to change the gear on the bicycle. I almost gave up in the first pass, but I ended up spending 2 months on the bike in New Zealand and I loved it. I was a rookie for sure. I had no idea how anything worked, but I had my tent, I had my sleeping bag, I had a bike and I had a route and I just went for it and I learned a lot on the way.
After that trip was over, you go back to Sweden, and I think about 3 years goes by before you start this bigger adventure. What did you do during those 3 years?
Yeah, when I came back from New Zealand, it was 2 years before I started my big trip. Back in New Zealand, I knew I wanted to go on another bike tour. I loved it so much. I got this small idea that maybe I could try to cycle back to New Zealand. I met another lady, a woman who'd cycled from England to New Zealand when I was in New Zealand. And I was thinking, oh my God, she cycled all that way. Can you do that? So then I thought maybe I can try it. I came back home. I had this idea in the back of my head, but I didn't pursue it. I was a bit lost then. I didn't really know what to do with my life. I didn't want to go back working as a designer. I took some other job at a newspaper, rented some apartment, but I was really not that happy. And about 1.5 years after I came home from New Zealand, I decided that let's go for this big trip. Let's try to cycle to New Zealand. And I planned it for 6 months. And then in the spring of 2015, I set off.
What was your planned daily budget at the time you set off?
I really didn't have one, even though I should have. I'm the kind of person that I go with my heart first and my head later. And I knew I left with a little bit too little money. I should have had more. I should have stayed home longer and saved up. But I was too eager to get out there once I decided to do it. So I left with what I had and what I had time to save up for. In the end, I spent about $10 a day, a little bit more. And I thought it's going to be less, but it ended up a little bit more.
Well, tell me about your bike and how you have it set up, your luggage set up.
Yeah, so my bicycle is a Surly long-haul trucker. I just researched what most bike tourists use, and this was recommended by a lot of people. So I ended up buying that. Still love it. It's really trustable bike. And with the setup, it was the same there. I had no idea when I left on my bike trip, and I brought way too much stuff. And I think the first 5 hosts I stayed with in Sweden and Germany, in all of these places, I left luggage and they sent it back home for me in the package because I just had too much stuff with me. And I learned throughout the whole trip about my luggage, what I needed, what I didn't need it. So I think the only thing I kept from the beginning to the end was the bike and the tent. Anything else I replaced. I sent it back home. I had to buy new things because the old ones didn't work. So that was really learning by doing with the whole setup.
How much do you think your New Zealand trip helped you in your preparations?
For sure, it did help. One thing was that I knew I could do it, because even if you don't know that much about it, you will solve it along the way. And it's not that many problems you can't solve on the way, and you just have to not be afraid to ask for help. So I learned that I can solve the problems as they come, and therefore I didn't feel like I had to plan this big tour into details. I could do the overall planning and then just head out there, and it would come to me and I would solve it.
Before you left, did you plan on going solo, or did you try to get anyone to go with you?
No, my plan was always to go solo. First of all, I didn't have anyone that wanted or could go with me at the time. But I also wanted to go alone. I wanted to do it my way, and only my way. Also, I can be a quite shy person. I can have a hard time to reach out to people I don't know. So I saw this tour as an opportunity to actually step out of my comfort zone, because when you're out there alone, you have to reach out, you have to talk to people and ask for help. And if you go with someone else, you kind of I get caught a little bit in a bubble, and you have someone else to lean back to. I just saw this trip as a big challenge.
Well, let's get into the journey a bit. If you don't mind, I'm just going to fast forward through Europe, because I'm more interested in like what happens when you get to Turkey and into some of these places for Westerners are more, I don't know, exotic. So I guess you could say,
yeah,
maybe not the best way to say it, but I think you know what I mean. So like, let's start at Turkey and maybe tell me about what your experience was going into Turkey.
Turkey was amazing. It's still one of my best countries I cycled. So when I left Europe and came into Turkey, it was the first time I felt I could start to enjoy the trip. The first months through Europe, everything was so new. I was very tense. But when I came to Turkey, I was kind of into it. And it was also my first time traveling in a Muslim country. And I was really excited to see how that was going to be. And I was blown away by the welcome I got in Turkey. The hospitality of the people, the kindness of the people. It's really amazing. And from the first day I entered Turkey until the last day, I was really amazed by the people living there. And I don't think I was that prepared for it, because I come from Europe, I come from Sweden, where I'm from. The people are a little bit in their bubble, and they stay for themselves. And in Turkey, it's the opposite. So, for example, a few days in my trip, there was a lady who passed me on a car. She waved down the window. She tried to wave me down, so she stopped me. She just walked up to me and pinched me in the cheeks and said, Turkish daughter, Turkish daughter. And then she pointed at her car. So I didn't know what she wanted. So she ran to the next petrol station, and she come back with 3 guys working in petrol stations. And they started to disable my bicycle. They took off the bags, they put them in her car, and then they squeezed my bicycle into her tiny car. So the front wheel is like touching the window in the front. And then I understood, like, okay, she want me to come to her home, and she want me to be her guest. And that sounds crazy, that you trust someone, that you jump into this car and just go with her. But there was something with the people here. It's like, it was just so trustable. I just felt from the core of my heart that she just wants good. So I went there in her car. She put on some Turkish music, highest volume, still calling me Turkish daughter over and over again. After 10 kilometers, we came to her house in Egididir, and I met her family. And I stayed there for 3-4 days, met her whole family, had a beautiful time. And then this just continued through all of Turkey. I just met all these amazing people that just, opened their arms and come into here, come to my family, stay here, have this meal. They stopped me along the way, asked me if I wanted help. And for me, being a Swedish person, not been traveling that much before, that was really astonishing for me.
It seems like it's hard to get any cycling done because you're always being stopped.
Yes, that's true. That was the hard problem, because you meet these wonderful people and you get invited to these families and you really have a good time. And I just want to stay more, and they want you to stay more, but eventually you have to leave because you still have a schedule, you still have a visa to follow. So it can be hard at times to actually leave these people behind.
How long were you in Turkey?
In total, 50 days, actually. So I cycled from Bodrum in the west to Dugobaisit in the east. So almost 2 months.
What was your favorite food there?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't really remember now. It was a lot of amazing food, but I'm really into sweets. So the Turkish delights, I had way too much of that. I think I gained like 3 kilos in those 50 days, if not more.
I talked to a cyclist once who came back from a cycle tour and had, I think, like 8 cavities in her teeth because she said she ate too many sweets in Turkey. Did that happen to you?
No, it didn't happen to me. It didn't. My teeth was okay, but I definitely had too much sugar.
Okay, so in Turkey now, this is where you meet a guy named Marius, and who's also a cycle tour, and he was on his way to summit Mount Ararat, and you decided to join him. What was that like to climb up to that top of that mountain?
Yeah, that was a crazy experience. So I just met him randomly along the way. He was from Romania. He was cycling from Romania to eastern Turkey to climb this mountain. So I met him on the way and we cycled together. And I asked him, like, can I come with you to the summit? Because I've never been that high on a mountain. He's like, yeah, sure. So we cycled for 10 days. We came to Dogobaisit and then we summited that mountain. So we walked from 1,600 meters up to 5,185 meters in about 1.5 days, which is the summit. And we camped about 4,500 meters. And this was my first major peak. And also, he didn't really have a permit to climb it. And I didn't either because it cost a lot of money. And it's kind of like a military area between Turkey and Iran. So we had to like sneak our own way up to the summit. I met some wonderful locals living on these mountains actually that invited us to stay the night. It was really, really a special experience to do that.
Did you experience any like altitude sickness or anything when you were going up that mountain?
No, I didn't. And I think part of that was because we went so fast up. So in 1.5 days, we had walked up, summited, and came down again. And I read somewhere if you do it really fast, your body didn't have time to get the high sickness. So I didn't feel that. But on the other hand, I had a cold before the summiting, was coughing a lot. And when I came down, it got worse. And I couldn't cycle for a couple of days after it. But I felt fine when I was on the mountain.
Well, next you head into Iran. And what was your experience like in Iran?
Oh, Iran is very special. I was actually quite nervous when I left Turkey on my way to the border to enter Iran because I had no idea what I was going myself into. Just that clothing code, what should I wear, what shouldn't I wear? So it was a lot of questions. But just as in Turkey, as soon as I came into Iran, I felt really cared for by the locals. And that nervousness just like floated off me. And unfortunately, I didn't do that much cycling in Iran as I hoped for. I mentioned that I got sick before, and I actually had to take a bus the last bit to Tehran. And also after Tehran, I had to take a bus because I had fever. I was feeling very bad. And this was in summer in Iran, so it's really, really hot. And you really don't want to go out there and push your bike on the road while you're sick. On the other hand, I met so much interesting people. And I got to do so much. So it was still a great experience to be in Iran.
What was your favorite city there?
So I actually just stayed in Tehran and then in...
Were you in Esfahan?
Oh, yeah, that's true. So when I was in Tehran, I actually had a friend flying in and we took a road trip with a car. So I left the bike for a week or two, and we drove up to the north, and then we drove down to the south to Esfahan. Because I really wanted to see that. I wanted to experience that, but I didn't have time to cycle down there and up again.
What's it like there?
I feel like I just saw a little bit of it. I would like to have stayed there much longer, just to soak everything in, because there's so much culture. You can feel it in the air. There's so much to explore and experience there. It's truly hard to put the words.
Also, when you were in Iran, you met the legendary Akbar. Tell me about that meeting.
Yeah, that was fun. So I was cycling, and then there was a man in a car who passed me and rolled down the window and took a photo of me. And then he just drove away. And I got a bit suspicious, like, why did he take a photo of me like that? Because he wasn't really smiling or anything like that. He just took the photo and he had off. I later learned that this is one of the guys that's a friend of Akbar, who's traveling this road a lot. And he's been told by Akbar, if you see any cyclist, just let me know. So he took a photo of me and he called Akbar and told him, is someone coming on a bicycle? And then just half a day after that happened, I was passing this town. I was not supposed to stay there. And this guy come up to me on a bicycle and say hello. And I had no idea who he is because I haven't heard about him before. And it turned out he's the legendary Akbar who hosts every cyclist who passes this road in Iran, which is a lot. So I was cyclist number 637 on his list. And this was just after 2 or 3 years of hosting, I think. Yeah, he hosted me. I got my own room. I got to spend an evening with the family he knew, which was wonderful. And also I got to do a little speech at the school for a group of young females, just as an inspiration thing for them, telling them about my journey and what I was doing and so on. That was really cool. And also Akbar, he knew the people that later hosted me in Tehran, Masha, which is one of the coolest, strongest, funniest ladies I ever met in my whole life. She's an Iranian woman living in Tehran, and due to all the restrictions you have in Iran as a woman, she's going her own way, both within her career, in her business, and as a sportswoman. And she is also later the one that took me up to the 2 highest peaks in Iran, Mount Damavand and Sabalon. So I met Akbar, and then I met Masha, and then she knew someone else in the next town that I stay with. So it's just this connection of people that you get to know that's really special. And it kind of started with Akbar in Iran.
What's the best food that you had in Iran?
Oh, the bread. They had some amazing bread. Some yellow bread, maybe with saffron in, I think. I had so much bread on the way. So that was my favorite.
After Iran, you have to cycle into Turkmenistan. And in this particular case, you didn't plan your money well enough. And you weren't able to, basically, you only had $20 to cross Turkmenistan. And you had to use 12 of it to get into the country. So you only had $8 to get across Turkmenistan. Tell me about Turkmenistan, and did that $8 get you all the way across?
Yeah, it did. It did, barely. So before I entered Iran, you have to withdraw all the money you need in the country. And it can be really hard to know how much you need for 1 month in Iran. But I calculated quite well. So I only had $20 left entering into Turkmenistan. But as you said, I kind of forgot about that I couldn't withdraw money in Turkmenistan either. And $8, that's okay, but I barely had any food in my panniers. I had some 2-3 packages of noodles. I had some oatmeals and 2 Snickers bars, and then $8. And in front of me, I had this 500-kilometer stretch through the desert to make it over to Uzbekistan, since you can only get 5 days of transit visa. So I knew it was going to be long, hard days, and then you need to eat a lot. So it was quite hard for me not eating that well. And I ended up actually doing those 500 kilometers in less than 4 days. And that was purely because I was so hungry and I couldn't wait to get to Uzbekistan so I could buy myself a proper meal.
Was that the first desert that you had cycled through?
Yes, it was. It was the first desert.
What was that experience like?
I liked it a lot because cycling in desert for me is very foreign. It's something very unfamiliar for me since I grew up and lived around the forest. So these vast landscapes with nothing barely, for me, that's really exciting. And I remember that first night camping in Turkmenistan, in the desert, in the sand. That was really something special.
Well, I pulled this quote from your blog, and it's about Uzbekistan. So before we talk about Uzbekistan, I'd like to read this quote. Do you mind?
No, do it.
It took us 3 days to cover 300 kilometers between Bukhara and Samarkand. The roads were the worst I've seen in my whole life, and our average speed wasn't much faster than 15 kilometers per hour. The landscape wasn't much to get excited about either, but the people, on the other hand, were. Everywhere we went, they gave us their biggest smile, and the smiles were golden, literally. I don't think I saw a single local person above 20 without one or several golden teeth, and I still don't know how they can afford it. I just know that the Uzbekistan people seems to be one of the most friendly, generous, and positive people I've ever met. Yeah, that's a great quote. Tell me about some of your experiences in Uzbekistan.
Yeah, so in Uzbekistan, it continued this hospitality from the people that I experienced in Turkey, in Iran, just continued into Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan felt really far from anything I ever seen or experienced before. It was just how people lived and how they dressed and how the roads looked like. Everything was exciting. Every day felt exciting. And then, of course, there was some hardships with the bad roads. And also here you have a visa that's ticking. But the people here were really friendly. I remember going to bed every night with a big smile on my face because you get so much smiles from the locals. They just saw a glimpse of you, and 2 seconds later you have this huge smile in their face. And that's really heartwarming. It's amazing with people that just spread their happiness to others.
So this is a time where you met up with another cyclist from Finland. I think his name is Taneli. Was this the first time during your trip that you had cycled with another person?
Yeah, that's true. We actually met at the embassy for Tajikistan in Tehran, Iran. We talked there and we realized we had the exact same entry date into Tajikistan. So then we decided, so let's do it together. Let's meet up there at this time and let's do it together. So from Iran, Tehran, we had different routes into Uzbekistan. And then we ended up actually meeting up before the border into Tajikistan. So we cycled a large amount of Uzbekistan together.
But when you try to exit, something goes wrong. And I guess Taneli overstayed his visa by a day or something. I don't know what the situation was. He didn't realize it, but then you guys get yourselves into trouble. Can you explain what happened?
Yeah. So the visa in Uzbekistan is 30 days, and that's not a whole month. And I think he miscalculated a little bit. So he was just counting 1 month when he should count the days. So when we came to the border, everything was fine with me, but with him, they stopped him. And first we had no idea what it was. It took half a day before I realized what it was. And then they said that you overstayed the visa by 1 day. And overstaying a visa is never a good thing, but especially not good to do in Uzbekistan. They have very strict rules there. You can't even enter or exit the country with anything suspicious in your packing. For example, you can't even have a photo of yourself in a bikini laying on a beach sunbathing somewhere, because that can be seen as a naked photo. So overstaying a visa was really serious. The first night we used pitch our tent 100 meters from the border. And the next day they sent us to this hotel in the nearest town called Shakar, I think. And then we were in house arrest there. We couldn't leave the room. We couldn't leave the hotel. We thought first, but then later on we could go to the town and have a meal and buy some food. We were stuck there, and they meant that they had to send a guy to a bigger city to extend Taneli's visa so he could exit, because he couldn't exit with the visa he had now because it was expired. In the end, we had no idea what happened. He paid them a lot of money. And the reason why they let us into Tajikistan after a week was because that was my last day on my visa. And I said that I'm not leaving if he's not coming with me. So we kind of did it together. I ended up getting food poisoning too, eating out while we stayed in the house arrest. So my first week in Tajikistan was really hard due to that. But still, I'm very happy that they eventually let us go, because our embassies didn't seem like they could do so much at the point. So it's just like up to them.
He had to, unfortunately, pay a little money to get himself out of his jam. And you guys make it into Tajikistan. You recover from your illness and you keep going. Looking back on it, it's probably a good thing that you were with Taneli, because somewhere at 4,500 meters, you injure your foot and you need help getting evacuated out. Tell me about that story.
Yes, so as you say, I was really happy I was with him here because usually I prefer to go solo, but I'm happy I wasn't solo here. We came into Tajikistan and we decided to leave the famous Pamir Highway and head for a valley called Shokdara Valley that is very remote. So we were cycling slowly up to this lake that's called Turum Tuikul something at 4,300 meters above sea level. It was a magic place, very remote, very silent, just us and the vast nature and these snowy peaks around us. And it was quite easy cycling while we were up there. I think I lost concentration looking at the mountains or something. So suddenly a simple hassock just threw my wheel sideways. And in the fall, my foot got caught in the pedal somehow. And as soon as I hit the ground, I felt that this is not good. And I couldn't stand on the foot and I could definitely not cycle on it. And here we were high up in the mountains. It was barely a path we were following. And we had at least a day's ride back down to Pamir Highway. So what we did was that I stayed in my tent and Taneli left his panniers and he just went off on his bike to find help. So I lay in my tent the rest of that day. The afternoon, evening comes. A storm comes in with a lot of snow and the night comes. I'm not sure if he's actually going to come back. Of course, I knew he would come back, but it's still a very vulnerable situation to be up there alone. I have no signal on my phone and I can't walk down the mountain and I can't cycle either. But at 4 a.m. in the morning, I see the lights from a four-wheel truck and he comes back with two local guys and they take me down from the mountain. He managed to find the only guys with the only truck that actually could make their way up that mountain because it was very off-road. They take me down and I go back to the town of Korog and I go to the hospital there. And it's a very simple hospital. It's a small place. But they did do an x-ray on my foot and they showed me clearly on the x-ray image that it's broken and he showed me the mark. And then he put the cast around my foot and that was it. I knew that this was late in the fall. It would take months before I could cycle again. And if I were about to stay in Tajikistan, I would have to wait until the spring, which would mean at least 6 months more. But also my visa was running out, so I couldn't stay in Tajikistan. So both me and Taneli had to find a guy that drove us out of Tajikistan into Kyrgyzstan on the Pamir Highway. So we were passing these cyclists cycling on the Pamir Highway, and I was sitting in the car with the cast around my foot and the bicycle on the roof. It was not really what I had expected. And then Taneli, we dropped him at the border. So he bordering to China. And I continued to Osh in Kyrgyzstan. And I booked a ticket home and I flew home. And just a few days after that accident, when I was up in the mountains above 4,000 meters, I was home with my mom again.
Let's talk for a minute about the health insurance, or maybe not health insurance, but traveler's insurance, because you had some, but in this instance, I don't think it worked like you intended it. Can you tell us about like what the travel insurance situation was with you and how much did this end up costing you?
Yeah, I had an insurance that covered a lot. I took the best one you can find when you do this kind of travel. And it actually would have helped me up to 3,600 meters. If I would be at that height or lower, I would have got all the costs back to me, including booking a last minute ticket back home. But now I was above 4,000 meters and I was honest to them. My first phone call to them, I told them what the height was. And then I realized afterwards, like, oh yeah, that was just above. So I ended up getting nothing for it. And I still haven't counted how much I put on this, but at least $500 it would cost me to just make my way back home again.
Okay. That's not terrible. It could have been $5,000.
Yeah, and this was thanks to these locals that actually came and helped me. Because in the worst case scenario, Taneli wouldn't find any help and you would have to send a helicopter. And with the insurance, if that would be at lower altitude, they would cover that. But if I would have to pay for a helicopter coming and get me, that would be a completely other amount of money. So I'm really happy for that.
You spend some time back in Sweden recovering, and I think it's about 4 months. And then you have to make a decision. You're going to go back and continue, but you have to decide, do I go back to the spot on the Pamir Highway and begin there, or do I take a new route? How did you make this decision?
Yes, I knew as soon as I came home that as soon as my foot is good, I'm going to head back again. The original plan was to fly back to Tajikistan, make my way up that mountain, and just touch that stone where I fell the first time and start over. Like, you're not going to stop me. I'm going to continue from here. After a while, it felt like a stupid idea to actually jump on a plane to continue on this bike ride I did, because I wanted to cycle. I wanted to be on the roads and experience things. I didn't want to fly anywhere. So instead, I decided to start over from my home again and cycled back to Tajikistan at the same place. But instead of going south, I would go a bit north this time. So that means northern Sweden, Finland, and into Russia. And along the way, that also changed. So I never ended up going back to Tajikistan. Instead, I continued straight east through Kazakhstan, Siberia, and into Mongolia. Because Mongolia had been a dreamland for me for many years to visit. And it would be hard with the seasons to go both back to Tajikistan and then up to Mongolia. So I just took the decision there. I've been in Tajikistan. Let's go for something new and take a completely new route. And I also had this idea in my head. I wanted to cycle every meter of this trip. And that meant also the really hard meters. And my first trial, the first 7 months I had up until Tajikistan, I had to take the bus a couple of times due to visas and due to injuries. And when I was back home recovering, I saw an opportunity to start over and actually try to cycle every meter on my route and not take a bus at any moment. So that was also a little bit of a goal of mine. Probably that goes back to when I was competing in track and field, and I like to put these goals for myself and try to accomplish them. Because it's a stupid thing, actually, to try to cycle every meter. Instead, you try to cycle and enjoy the good parts, and the more dangerous roads, maybe, you can take a bus. But I decided that it's not going to be like that. I want to cycle every meter. And that was one of my goals when I started over.
Let's talk about Russia. I have another quote that I'm going to read here. And you went into Russia, I think, a couple of times, and Russia's a big country. So after this quote, maybe you can tell us about like which part of Russia this was. But here's the quote. I didn't get hit by a car, robbed, harassed, or sick. I didn't give up or break down. I just got up every day, packed my bike, and cycled the required distance to reach the border before my visa would expire. Still, Russia was harder than I want to admit, and I can't even say exactly why. It was the small things, the things you feel rather than see, the atmosphere. Tell me about Russia.
Yeah, so Russia, I entered from Finland into Russia, and then I had 1 month of cycling into Kazakhstan. And then after Kazakhstan, I went into Russia again, the Siberian part of Russia, from the border into Kazakhstan and into Mongolia. So in total, I had about 2 months in Russia. I had a quite hard time motivate myself for some reason. That first stretch between Finland and Kazakhstan, it was bad weather and it was really bad roads, really, really bad roads, worse than in Uzbekistan. And then the roads are quite narrow, so it's no shoulder for me as a cyclist. At the same time, it's heavy traffic. I would have big trucks passing me in 100 kilometers an hour, just leaving half a meter of space to me. So many times through Russia, I was cycling, holding my breath because I was so scared. And I started to question myself and my whole trip. Like, why am I doing this? Maybe it's a reason why not that many people go touring in Russia. Why am I risking my life to this? And at the same time, the Russian people, they are not like the Turkish people. They are a little bit like us in Sweden, maybe a little bit more shy, not reaching out that much. But with the combination with the hard conditions, I felt like no one cared about me there. And then it kind of locked in my head that I just want to get out of here. I just want to get into Kazakhstan. It's going to be better there. And as soon as I had locked myself into this feeling, I stopped reaching out and I stopped seeing the good parts. So part of why I had such a hard time in Russia, I think, was because of me. But then the second time when I went into the Siberian part, I had another mind into it. And even if the roads were bad there too, it felt better. I think partly was me having a hard time in my trip at that time, and partly because of the traffic situation for cyclists there.
Let's talk about that second part of Russia, because I think that's now you're in the Altai Mountains. That's 7 days, 570 kilometers, 6,000 meters of total climbing. What was it like going through those Altai Mountains?
Oh, they were amazing. I just wish I had more time there. As I mentioned before, I had this promise to myself to cycle every meter. So when I left Kazakhstan, I had this stretch of 1 week following a really bad highway there in Siberia. It was just heavy traffic and just sitting on these roads day in and day out. But I refused to take a bus. So instead, I ended up not having that much time in the Altai Mountains, which I wish for. It's very different from the rest of Russia I had seen up there. And it's beautiful, surrounded by mountains everywhere. The people they are really calm, really friendly, very open. And I just have the best time those 7 days I cycled.
Let's rewind to Kazakhstan. And I want to get your thoughts on your experiences there. But before I do, I have another quote that I pulled from your blog that I'm going to read because I think it's really great. And it goes, "Before I started this journey, I had a vision of a simple life on the road. I wanted to follow the sun, breathe and sleep nature, unload my mind, and let my legs take me to remote places. Of course, I knew that bike touring is a lot of hard work too. Long hours on busy roads, heat and cold, loneliness and worries about visas and money. But above everything else, I was looking for simplicity. And in Kazakhstan, I found it." What was your experience like going into Kazakhstan?
Kazakhstan was almost like a month-long meditation retreat for me, combined with a lot of hard works, of course. But as I said in the quote, I cycled, I ate, and I slept. And I did that on repeat for 20 days. And the simplicity of that is really great. You get to reload your thoughts, start over, and just be in the moment. At the same time, Kazakhstan was quite hard. I had 20 days to cover 200 kilometers. And usually that would be okay, but it was really brutal headwinds in Kazakhstan. It's this open steppe. It's nothing that takes the wind. It just hits you right in the face. So I cycled long days usually from 7 in the morning until 8, 9 in the evening until I had covered those 100 kilometers that I had to.
Did you say you had 2,000 kilometers to go?
Yes.
Somewhere in here, your phone breaks, but just before your phone broke, there was a notice of some kind of a terrorist attack in a city in Kazakhstan. So now you're without your phone. So not only do you not know what's going on in terms of the terrorist attacks, but you don't have any way to navigate. So what do you do at this point?
Yeah, that was a crazy experience. I was in western Kazakhstan in a town called Uralsk. And I stayed in a hotel there actually to recover a night. And I'm standing in the hallway. I'm just about to leave when I get this email. And in the headline it said, "Red terror alert declared after attack in Aktobe." And Aktobe is the next city I would pass 4 days later. And then, of course, my head started to spin like, can I continue? Or I started to look at detours, and I realized if I take this detour down south where I don't go through October, I would have to push at least 150 kilometers a day to make it with a visa. And that was really not something I was looking forward to. At the same time, my phone had been struggling a little bit before, turning off itself and coming back some day later. So before I left that hotel in Uralsk, I actually drew some maps in my notebook of my whole route through Kazakhstan. And it's quite straightforward. There's not too many turns and stuff. So it was no advanced maps. But I also drew a map of the detour if I would have to take it. And then I left. And I had no phone. I couldn't update myself with the information of any news and the navigation, of course. And on the way towards October, I cycled through a lot of roadblocks, and they were manned with armed soldiers. So I could really feel the tension everywhere that, okay, they were blocking the roads here in hope of catching these terrorists. And it was really hard time for me with communication, with the language barrier, because I couldn't really get information from these soldiers and the police. It's like, can I continue or can I not? But they kept on smiling and waved me by. And I just kept on thinking to myself, if they're smiling to me and let me pass this block, then it must be fine. So I continue. And 4 days later, I cycled into October, and it was okay. It was fine. It was that event a few days before, but nothing more. But still, it was a surreal thing to cycle into something that you had no idea what it was, and potentially something dangerous. And then when I left October, I still didn't have any phone through the rest of Kazakhstan. So that was also a bit of a challenge for me. Not only didn't I have any navigation tool, I just had these drawings I made in my notebook. I couldn't communicate with my friends and family back home. And it might sound like a silly thing, but sitting on these flat roads in Kazakhstan where you don't pass that many towns or villages, I didn't meet that much people. It's really brutal, hard headwinds. It's hard work every day. And not having any music or any podcasts to listen to, the days get very long. In the end, that was also a good thing, and I learned a lot from that experience. But then in the end of Kazakhstan, I got myself a new phone, and that made everything much easier.
What kind of music do you listen to?
Oh, I'm into instrumental electronic music, kind of like slow beat that pump you up. I listen a lot to folk music, happy music, and singer-songwriting is all different kinds. It depends on if I want to push the pedals hard, is electronic. If I just want to enjoy the environments and be happy, I listen to some Mumford & Sons, for example.
Somewhere along the way, you meet another guy that you cycle with, Tomasz, and I think he joins you at the end of Kazakhstan and then through Siberia and into Mongolia. So the two of you now, is he from Poland?
Yeah, he's from Poland. We actually met 2 weeks before I was going to restart my trip. I moved back home to my mom's place. So I had quit my work and I just had 2 weeks of the last preparations. And then someone sent me an email and said, hey, is this crazy guy cycling around the Baltic Sea now in the winter, and he's going to pass by your village just 3 days from now. Maybe you want to host him. I'm like, of course I want to host him. I want to give back as much as I can, as many people that have hosted me. So I reached out to him and said, hey, you can come over and stay at our place if you want to. And he did. And then after that, we kept in contact when I started my trip. He wanted to join my trip, so we decided he flew into eastern Kazakhstan and he joined me there. And then we cycled together throughout Siberia and Mongolia. And then he flew back home after that, and I went solo through China. But that was also a great experience. It's quite different cycling with company, with someone, than to go solo. And I'm happy that I have both of those experiences.
You guys spent 60 days in Mongolia. You split up the Mongolia to a couple of different routes that you took. One was, I think you traveled some time in the central, which required you to take a long, long bus ride to get into the central part. The bus ride sounded terrible. Can you give me a little bit of an idea what that bus ride was like?
Yes, so we entered Mongolia in the west. We came to the town of Olgi, and we extended the visa. So we had 60 days to spend in Mongolia, and I really wanted to see as much as possible in Mongolia. I didn't want to miss out on the green steppe in the central part. At the same time, we didn't have enough time to do both the central part and the western part that I also wanted to see, and then into China. So, not to break my route, I wanted to have a continuous line all the way down to Singapore. I decided to take a bus to central parts, cycle that, and then take a bus back to the same town again of Olgi. So we took a bus from Olgi to Bayankongo, it's called, in the south. That was a hard bus ride. They squeezed in a lot of people in that bus. I had a tiny little space made for a kid, I think, and I'm quite tall, so it was squeezed with my knees up to my shin. And people were laying on the floors, covering the whole bus, and it's very, very bumpy. So we're going over the desert, and the whole bus is just jumping. And I was sitting way back in the bus, and every time the bus hit the bump, you flew up and you hit your head in the roof because there was no seatbelts to have on either. So you sit there and hold your hands over your head not to crush it. And then in the middle of the night, in the middle of the desert, of course, the bus broke down. So we had to stay there for a couple of hours. And I don't remember now. I think it was just something like 250 kilometers that bus ride was, but it took more than 40 hours before we arrived. And I was very happy to get back on my bicycle after that. No more backwards.
I bet. Now, we're calling it a bus, but I think, like, as an American, when I hear the word bus, I think of this very large vehicle. Was it more like a van, or was it a bigger bus?
No, the first one we took was a big bus that fits a lot of people. And then when we left the Central Park and went back to the west, then it was actually a minivan with just 7 people in. And that was a completely other experience. That was quite comfortable compared to the first one.
Well, how did you like Mongolia?
Oh, Mongolia was a dream coming through to me to visit. I always wanted to go there. I've seen the yurts, the wild horses, the landscape and the mountains on TV. And it was almost surreal to actually stand there on my bicycle and be able to cycle it. The central part was my favorite. It's this endless green steppe with trails everywhere and mountain. And every time you climb a pass and you look over to the next valley, it's just you have to stop and take it in. It's so mind-blowing beautiful. And then also just to be invited to the families living in these yurts is very amazing. Just the way how they live, how they sleep, the food they're cooking. It's really amazing to be a part of that and see how they live. A hard thing in Mongolia though was the food, because they don't have any fresh food, no fresh vegetables, no fresh fruit, because they cannot grow it in Mongolia. The ones they have is imported from Russia, for example. And when we were in the central parts, you couldn't find any fresh vegetables. I think we found some potatoes at some point. So we were basically eating Chinese fast noodles and Snickers and some canned food for 2 months. And at the same time, pushing yourself really hard over the steppe, over mountain passes. So in the end of Mongolia, I was really, really weak. And I felt like 2 months is enough. I couldn't have stayed here longer. And that first meal in China, I was so looking forward to it, because I knew as soon as you come into China, you're going to have all these fresh vegetables and this amazing cuisine. And I remember the first day in China, we cycled over the border, we came to the first town, and we went to the first restaurant we saw. And of course, we have no idea what anything is, because it's in Chinese. And I just pointed at something in the menu, and we got this big plate with a whole chicken chopped in pieces. So you have the legs sticking up and the head sticking up and the body. I don't even know how to start or how to eat it. So it was maybe not the first good meal I had longed for, but still the rest of China was amazing when it came to the food coming from Mongolia.
Your trip through China, north to south, took you through 5 different provinces. If you were to pick out a province and describe it, which one would it be?
It must be the middle one when I went over the Tibetan Plateau. So I had 3 months in total in China. And China for me felt like the whole world in one country because it's so different. And I felt like I only scraped a tiny bit on the surface of what it really is. But when I came to the Tibetan Plateau, is one of the coolest experiences of my life cycling that. Both because it was very memorable part of my whole cycling trip, but also because it was cool as really, really cold. So I'm cycling at high altitude. Starting in northwest China, I went through the Turpan Depression, which is 150 meters below sea level. And then when you come to the plateau, I climbed up to 5,000 meters above sea level. Slowly, of course, one day at a time, so you get used to the height. And then I spent a couple of weeks above 4,500 meters, climbing passes every day and just enjoying. It's hard to describe. It's very spiritual, the Tibetan Plateau, because it's part of Tibet, of course. Everything feels very spiritual. The people you meet feel spiritual, the places. So I felt a calm when I was cycling there. It was very hard cycling. I woke up every morning in my tent having between minus 20 and 30 degrees inside my tent. And just to get started and get up on the bike was a struggle. But everything else just made it worth it. And then me struggling to get up in the morning and sit on the bike. And still I knew a couple of weeks from now I will be down in Yunnan where it's warm and tropical. And then I meet these people that actually live up here above 4,500 meters. They live in these very simple houses living on their animals and what their animals give them. And that's also very mind-blowing how they actually live up there.
Well, after China, you end up in Australia and you cycle from Perth to Brisbane through Alice Springs. Somewhere along the way, you meet, I think, a guy who's your current partner. And so tell me about your experience going through Australia.
Yeah, sure. So after China, I actually cycled to Southeast Asia. So Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, and down to Singapore. And that was maybe not the part I remember the most of my trip. I also had a hard time with the heat in Southeast Asia at that time. And as soon as I came to Australia, I was like a relief. The weather was good. And I just had this big country to cross in front of me. And cycling the Outback in Australia was really something special. So I started in Perth and I headed to the Great Central Road, which is a stretch throughout the Outback in Western Australia that take you up to Alice Springs. And there's a few stops along the way where there's a little shop you can fill up stuff, but otherwise I have to carry a lot. I think at some point my bike was weighing like 85 kilos. And you're going on sandy, very corrugated roads through the Outback. But I love that part of touring also. I love when it's a challenge. It cannot be too easy. In Southeast Asia, it was almost too easy. You can buy ice cream around every corner. It's hostels and hotels everywhere. It's smooth roads. But there in the Outback, you have to rely on yourself. Do I have enough food with me? Do I have enough water with me? Will my bike hold up this weight? Can I make it to Alice Springs with my own force? So I love that challenge of bike touring and to just head into it. And at the same time, after Alice Springs, there was also another stretch of Outback called the Plenty Highway. It's also on sandy, corrugated roads, remote, before you come up more towards the civilization and you head out to the east. And on the Plenty Highway, it was also quite a big challenge because at one point it started to pour. It rained for 2 days in a row. And those sandy roads just turned into pure mud. And to push your 80-kilo bike through thick mud is not a fast process. So that was also a real challenge because the visa was ticking down. So I didn't have all the time in the world to spend in Australia. But when I came to Alice Springs, I was quite tired after making my way over the Great Central Road. So I stayed with a host through warm showers for almost a week, just recovering, gaining force, and planning for the next Outback stretch. And then my last evening in Alice Springs, I met this guy, and we share a beer, me, him, and his friends, at a local pub. And I actually ended up staying one more extra day just to hang out with them because, I liked their company. They were nice. They were fun to be around. So I stayed another day, and then I head off. So his name was Guilherme. He's from Portugal, and he was traveling Australia on a working visa. And we kept in contact. And when I finished my trip 2.5 months later in Wellington, New Zealand, he was the only one standing there on my imaginary finishing line at the harbor in Wellington, waiting for me. And we ended up spending some time in New Zealand. We flew back to Australia. When I finished my trip, I didn't have enough money to actually buy a flight ticket back home to Sweden. So when we went back to Australia, it was because I got a job and I needed to save up money to buy that flight ticket. So me and Guilherme did that together. We worked at the farm, at the vineyard. And after a couple of weeks, I had enough money to buy that ticket, but we also had some money to do a little bit of bike touring together. So we actually took the boat over to Tasmania, and we cycled Tasmania from the north to the south. And after that, I went home to Sweden. And today he lives in Sweden here with me since almost 2.5 years now. And we have a daughter together.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
When you did get to the end in Wellington, what were your thoughts? What went through your mind? Because you accomplished your goal.
Yeah, I always imagine that day, sitting on my bicycle, cycling through country to country. I was thinking about this day, how we will feel the day I will cycle into Wellington. And I thought it's going to be this explosion of emotions. That was going to be really happy, really proud of myself. I did it. I finished it. I made my way to Wellington as I planned. But that last day on the bicycle, I felt nothing almost. I was very down because I also realized that this was the last day on my trip. And it's very cliche that it's the journey makes the trip, but that's the truth. I had the best time of my life, those 2 years on the bicycle, and cycling into Wellington meant that it was my last day on this trip. And it took a long time before I could feel that excitement or proudness that I actually did it. But I was a bit sad that it was over. In that case, it was good that Guilherme stood there because then we started a new adventure together.
So what ended up being your favorite piece of equipment or favorite piece of gear throughout the journey?
I think I had a journal and I had another book too that I kept my statistics for every day. So every day throughout the whole journey, I ended the day in my tent writing my journal, and I wrote quite a lot. And at times I thought maybe it's stupid to carry these journals. They are heavy and they take space. But I'm really happy I have them now because now back home after this trip, I have 10 books, 10 journals where I have written about my whole journey every day. So I really like my journal with me. Also my pillow. I realized that I really appreciate my pillow. I had an inflatable pillow that made all the difference for me to have a good sleep in my tent. And also my knife. To have a good knife is good. I used it a lot while cooking and so on, everything.
What about the adventure are you most proud of?
First of all, I'm very proud that I actually left to begin with because I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I'm so happy that I just took that first step and tried it. And second of all, I'm proud that throughout the journey, I always followed my gut feeling. And that learned me how to trust people. And trusting others really led me to some of the most memorable meetings of my life.
What for you is the biggest takeaway of the adventure?
Don't believe in everything you read, I would say, because living in this part of the world that I am now, media usually only cover the bad things in other more unknown parts of the world. And this is shaping us when we grow up, and we learned not to trust the world or the people in it. And I really learned that you should not believe in everything they say and read. Because yes, it might happen bad things out in the world, but the good things overrule that anytime. As I said before, I really learned how to trust people, and that's because people are good. I really felt that 99% of the people that I met is really good people, and that you get what you give. If you travel the world with a smile, you will usually get smiles back. I also feel like I have a greater understanding of people and respect for people. Another takeaway from this whole adventure is that I learned how to focus more on the present. Because I think for most people, if you live in the present and not so much in the past or the future, you will feel happier. And that's really truth. So I try now, back in my life here in Sweden, to really focus on the present and what I have here in front of me. And also it's a really great feeling doing this kind of adventure, because my self-belief is so much greater. I trust myself a lot more, and I know what I can accomplish, and I know that whatever problem comes to me, I will solve it.
And where will your interests take you next?
Yeah, so since I came back from my trip, Guillermo moved here, we got engaged, we bought a house, and we got a daughter. So now it's all about raising her to become a great human being, and later on, I really want to show her the world, and I want to show her all the good things that I saw on my tour. I want to take her out on adventures. We already started a little bit. We already went away with the bicycles a little bit, put her in the trailer in the back. She really liked it. But in the future, I hope to live a good life at home and to go on bike adventures, but as a family with her. And one big goal for the future is to cycle South America, because I've never been there. So I'm thinking many years ahead, when she's old enough, we're planning to head to South America and cycle some mountains with her.
How can people find you online if they want to learn more about your adventure?
So I have a blog, even though I haven't blogged about my whole trip. It's about 2/3 of it is covered, but that's mairawa.com. So MAIRAWA.com. And then also my Instagram account, because there I posted throughout the whole trip, and I have the same name there, Mairawa. You can find me. Otherwise, just email me. You can find the email at my website.
Okay. And Johansson, thank you so much for sharing your story, coming on the show. Congratulations on the achievement of cycling all that way, and of your new daughter. Best of luck and best wishes in your future.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again for listening. This episode was recorded on May 10th, 2020. To send me some feedback, my email address is paul@thepursuitzone.com. You can leave me a voice message by going to speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. As always, the best way to support the podcast is to subscribe and share it with your friends. For subscription links, show notes, and more, visit thepursuitzone.com.